Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Problem Design Solution. And if this is your first time looking at this series, we here at Pragmatic Works are trying to make an effort to put out these videos to help those who might encounter some of these design issues or have encountered them. So hopefully this will be either an answer to a question you have currently or just outright stop you from hitting some issues in the future. And in today's episode, we're tackling something around the folder source option, which is a fantastic choice when bringing in files into Power BI. But we're going to look at it specifically in regards to JSON files. So the files that are structured inside in that JSON style. Well, what exactly is the issue here? Well, folder source option, bare minimum requirements. Same file type and same structure. So same number of columns and they're named the same. That's it. And then you can point to and use this folder choice to bring in however many files exist in there, and it loads it into one giant table. It's a great way, really. You can think about it almost like merging or appending queries. But you're doing this all for your files. So if you have a normal location where you're dropping files into and you want Power BI to kind of collect those all and bring those into a table so you can then visualize and explore and analyze the data, folder, fantastic choice. And these are going to be great for your text, your CSVs. But when it comes to things like XML and JSON, it doesn't handle it as gracefully. What happens, and here's a quick example of what it looks like, if you use this with a JSON file in my example, one, you can see right away the data needs to be pivoted. We need to also maybe do some data cleansing here, but the outputted table is as such. I brought in multiple records. One at the very end you can see is actually fully errored. So to actually clean this up, it's going to take a fair amount of work. And what's actually happening here in the upper right-hand corner, as we can see here, a ton of stuff. This is what the folder option is achieving. It's going through, it's pulling a sample file. It's going ahead and doing some basic transformations. It actually leverages a function to pull in all of the files in that folder, and then it outputs this table. So it's doing a lot of work, but it just doesn't handle it nicely. You could actually go through the efforts and modifying the individual steps here, but the problem is these are built on layers. So the function is based off of the table is based off of the sample file. So making a change actually needs to happen in multiple places. So how do we go about doing this? What's an easier way? That's what we're going to be focusing on today. But let me just walk you through and show you how I got to this example. So here I'm going to be in Power BI. So here we are in Power BI. Now let's go through that option of choosing the folder source and picking my directory that has, in this case, I have 3 JSON files. So I'm going to go here to the upper corner, hit Get Data. It's not one of the most frequently used options, so I'm going to just go down and hit More. From here, I'm going to choose that folder option. And I will just navigate to the respective location. So here in this folder, just right here. So I'll hit OK. It's going to give me the options to either load this directly into the data model, or do I want to edit it, which is where I'm going to go so we can look at this. And we can see those very steps and efforts that I just illustrated on the PowerPoint slides. We're going to see here inside of the query editor. So here in the upper left, we'll see the effort that's being made here. All this transform information, the function, the table, and unfortunately we have this output. Once again, not what we needed. We're going to need to do too much cleanup after the fact. So let's go ahead and find out what's the route that we're going to take to rectify this problem. And funny enough, we are pretty much going to be following what's happening here in this example in the upper right. Well, we saw that what was being done by the folder option innately, we're actually going to do manually. Not all the steps, but a fair amount of them, and we'll be in control of what's happening at each piece of the process. So let's take a quick look at what the design is going to look like. So for design, what we're going to do is break this down one by one. We're actually going to use the file option within the sources to point to one of the JSON files. And this is effectively going to be hard-coded at first. But this allows us to bring in a file, basically a sample of what exists inside of the folder, do all the necessary transformations that we would like to do, and then from there, all we're going to need to do is set up and create a list, basically something that is going to collect what are all of the file names that exist in that folder, which we've already done, a little sneak peek. We just got to use the folder option here, but we're going to exclude some of the unnecessary columns. You might have seen it in the previous example, but we're going to go through it again. There's one column in particular there that's going to be really helpful for us. And once we do that, once we have our sample file with everything, all the transformations done that we like, We've gotten our list of files that exist there, and we set it up in a way that that'll always be updating and refreshing. If new files drop in, we remove some. But we need something to incorporate that list of file names. We need to push that through into that first connection. Where we are pointing to a hard-coded file, we need to iterate. We need to loop through a list of file names in that first connection. And the way we're going to do that is by leveraging a function. And we're going to see that by going into the advanced editor. A small amount of M, not much needs to be done here, but we're going to walk through that. You're going to see how we can create a parameter, and it turns that table actually into a function that we can then use for our purposes. So, with no further ado, let's go back into Power BI, and let's put this into action. So here we are again, Power BI. I've opened up a fresh report just to make sure we start this on a clean surface. But we're going to start with pointing to a file, effectively getting a sample file. I'm kind of correlating this to what the folder option was doing. And for me, in order to do this, I'm going to go to the Get Data, bring up that list that we have available to us. I'm going to choose this JSON option here, hit Connect, and it's going to ask me to indicate a JSON file in the one in question, one I want to use. So for me, I have this located right here on the my desktop, and in this folder, we can see there are 3. Remember, as far as folder option goes, the concept behind that is the same file type. These are all .json files and the same structure. How many columns and the name of the columns. So it shouldn't matter what I choose here. I'm going to choose the first one just to bring that in. I need some basis in order to apply these transforms to. And in this example, it's really only going to be one really easy transform. After turning this into a table, of course, I'm simply going to go to the transform option. I'm going to pivot this column here, name, and there's one last thing because it's asking about this value column, what to potentially we want to do with it, because there's some values here that's going to go from being in one column to the rows. We don't want to do any aggregation at this moment, so I'm going to indicate that under the advanced options. And we can see it gets pivoted, everything's a little more organized here, much better looking. Now, of course, the last thing I'm going to do, proper naming convention, let's change this to something that makes a little more sense. So that's step 1, getting that sample file. Step 2, we've got to get that list. So here, we're actually going to repeat a step that we've already done, but we're going to do some editing on what's returned to us. We already know if I go into this and I choose the folder option and I navigate to that same directory, what the results are, because we saw that before in the problem. But one of the columns in question that exists there is actually extremely helpful. Let's take a look at what that is. Let's let that load. We've got our 3 files that are in there. The first column that we're going to see appear here, called source.name, that holds the key of what we need to do. So we can see as this is being transformed and brought in, we don't like this data, but guess what? We don't need it. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to control click both of these, select those, I'm going to right click and remove them because they're not needed. And then I'm going to rename this to file name. And lastly, one last transform, remove duplicates, because it was bringing in on each individual row all the individual values of those receipts. Those are what my JSON files are. They're just receipts, really. But now I've got a distinct list of the file names that exist in that folder, right? And the way I have this set up is it's pointing to this folder, and it's going to do all of these applied steps to what it finds, which means in the future, when I refresh this based off of this connection, it's going to look in the folder, grab those whatever files exist, whatever name, so this list will be updated whenever that happens. And that's what we want. But we're not done yet. We still have that last piece. We need to take this list and actually overwrite what's being done here. Because if we look, and we're going to do this in the advanced editor, and we focus in on the connection just right here, we can see that we actually have this hard-coded file name right here. This is the exact file we use for the sake of the transforms. Now, it served us our purpose for the beginning piece to actually, assign and set up some transformations, in this case, just pivoting. But this is what we need to make dynamic. And the way we're going to achieve that is by turning this into a function. And that is done by defining and naming a parameter. So open parentheses, I'm just going to call this file. I'm going to give it a data type, so it's a text data type. And then the syntax here is going to be equal sign greater than. By doing this, we've defined a parameter. We're going to leverage that inside of this M query, this mashup query. And the way it's going to work is I'm going to get rid of this, just delete it. I'm leaving the double quotes because that's still a text value that needs to come in correctly, so it's a literal string there. And I'm going to concatenate using the ampersand to this, just my parameter, so file. just like that. And you'll see this is going to change from being a table to, voila, a function, waiting to be invoked. We don't want to just add one file in there and invoke this. We're going to leverage and create a column. We're going to invoke a function to create a new column back in my files table. So stay with me. We're just going to highlight the files table. We're going to go over to add column, invoke custom function. Now note, I could go this custom column route and just like type this out just using M, but it's actually easy both ways. I want to show you this interface though. Invoke custom column, the name of my column, I'm just going to call this details. The function that we're going to leverage here is the JSON file, just using the name there. And the value that we're going to pass through to the parameter there called file, what are we going to pass through to that, is the column called file name right here. So when I hit OK, it's going to go through that process. It brings in this table, this packed column, which is effectively there's a table in here, and I can expand this. And I can choose how do I want to expand this. Now ID, if you were very sharp-minded and you remember how it looked in the beginning from the PowerPoint, ID actually is the same thing as the file name. So I'm going to uncheck this. I'm going to also say don't use the original column name as a prefix because then I have details.category, details.bill. I just don't like the formatting in this scenario. I'll expand it and voila. I've actually got everything that I want from each of these receipts. And even so, there's a little bit of complexity that existed in one of the receipts. The first one actually had an array. Bill actually breaks down into an array and has 2 attributes in it. So I could potentially expand this another level, hit OK here, and that now is added to this list of transformations. When I bring this in, we're going to make sure and handle that array correctly. The second and the third receipt that we see on this list actually didn't even have that represented in the JSON itself, but it can still handle it using this design. So I've actually got everything I need, which means that we've come ahead and gone back to our solution. So let's take a look at what we kind of did here. So all that's left, it's one last step, because we leveraged this design of doing the transforms on a hard-coded file. We used the file source option to point to a JSON file, do what we needed to do. Eventually, that got changed into a function when we used the advanced editor. But then we used the folder option to pass through the values we wanted to there. Basically, the values that are going to be passed through the parameter in that function. So with this all in play, with this design implemented, now we have it set and we can close and apply this, bring this into our data model, and also, because of the way we designed it, whatever gets changed or added in that folder as files start getting added or dropped, it's going to be able to handle this. I can actually show you an example of it. So let's head back over one last time to Power BI. So here we are. We've got this solution. We designed it exactly as we just described. All that's left is for me to hit close and apply. This is going to build it, bring it into the data model, and we're going to see on the right-hand side, I have got all the available options from me. Now, one thing I wanted to show in particular, we know that I have file name, which would have been the same as ID. I'm going to select that, which brings it into this table view. And we can see it's just giving me the 3 names of the 3 files that currently exist. Well, if we go ahead and we actually bring that folder up, right here, we can see that I actually have one more JSON file outside of this. If I were to take this and drag it and put it inside the same folder, now there's 4 inside of here. I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh. It's going to go through all the process. It's going to take care of those, it's going to apply those steps in the order that I did. And you can see, voila, it is right here. It's been added in. It's been refreshed. We've set this up, so it's going to be nice and easy to handle. So hopefully you found this very helpful, very beneficial. Let's do a quick final review of the entirety of what we covered here. Let's bring that right back. So here's all the steps in process. We knew that the folder source, as fantastic as an option that it is, just doesn't handle all the different types of data that could come in a file, specifically honing in on JSON. But this would work on XML also. We worked through an effort of effectively taking the same steps that the folder option does, which they call transform file or transform binary. For the most part, we followed that same process in design, but we did that manually. We basically pointed to one file using the file option, and that became our basis for what transforms did we want to do to this file. We then used the folder option so that you can bring in an entire list of what exists in the folder at that moment of time, which is the cool part. It'll keep updating. And then we amended and changed the M that existed in that first file source, and we updated it so that it was leveraging a parameter basically, instead of hard coding, what file do we want to pull from? And we combine that with the folder, basically. The values inside the folder feed the parameter, which run that source. And with that all said and done, we were able to close and apply, bring that into the model, and we were able to see how it gracefully handles when and if new files get added or dropped into that folder itself. If this was at all helpful or beneficial, just know that there's other PDS series out there. We also do have another series called 5 Minutes to Wow, where we more show tips and tricks, not necessarily tackling problems, but things that could maybe alleviate or hasten the pace or just make your reports that much cooler, done by us here at Pragmatic Works. As well as you can see, we do have a promo code here that you can leverage as far as using our on-demand training platform to experience so many other training topics, as well as Power BI, but beyond. Thank you and have a great day.